To start replacing this oil pan, I'm going to start by draining the oil. Get yourself a drain bucket as well as a 14mm wrench or socket and break this free. Remove the oil drain plug. All right, that's good enough. You just want most of it drained so that oil doesn't come pouring down when you take the pan off. So tighten this up. To make sure it doesn't leak on you. Now I want to take off all the 10mm bolts that hold on this oil pan, and there should be 2 nuts actually. There's one right here, and then there's one more right here by the oil filter. I'm going to start with these rear ones. A lot of them are going to be corroded, so that'll be quite a challenge. That bolt right there is going to be difficult to get to unless it's in good condition. You can get it from up here. So what I'm going to have to do is take this exhaust bracket down. Someone's already taken down the lower piece of it, so I have to just take off the top. So in order to not have to drop the exhaust, to remove this bracket, because the exhaust is kind of in the way of it, what I'm going to do is try and massage it out of my way. I'm just going to persuade it to, move to the side. I mean, someone's already removed this piece and never put it back, so that's gone. I have space now. That should do it. Wasn't doing anything anyway. Obviously, if your bracket here is still intact, you can take this down and just bend it a little bit or remove the exhaust. Most likely, with a car this age, it's, damaged or altered. This one here, because it's stripped, I'm going to use one of these. Extractor socket is twisted like that because it'll bite onto the bolt as I hammer it on, and hopefully it will remove the bolt for me. That should work. There we go. Now I can just put a new bolt in there when I reinstall. It's hard to show you these on camera, so I'm just gonna show you from over there. For this one right there, I'm gonna use a swivel adapter because it's just at the wrong angle. Okay, so the best combination for this is a slight swivel with a small extension and a short socket, not deep. Okay, that did it. That was the last one. Now with all the bolts out, you can use a pry bar and just try to pry the oil pan down. It can be a little tricky because there's not a lot of room to pry, but since we're replacing it, you don't have to worry about bending it. Get this pry bar right here and then just use a hammer and try to push the pry bar in there. Perfect. There we go. Now watch out, there's still quite a bit of oil left in the oil pan, always, so just be careful, drain it, make sure it doesn't splash where you don't want it. And there you go. The next thing I want to do after the oil pan is off is I need to scrape off all this old gasket maker, and the best way to do that is with a razor blade. Brand new razor blade. You don't want to scratch up the surface too much. It's aluminum, so it will scratch easily. And you want to just go along and just scrape this off as best as you can so you can create a nice clean surface for the new gasket maker to adhere to. It doesn't have to be spotless, but Just get it as clean as you can, and then at the end we'll degrease it. That's important. It has to be degreased for sure. So I've cleaned up the whole area with the razor blade, and then I wiped it with a rag. What I'm going to do next is add some brake parts cleaner to a brand new clean rag and degrease the surface. This is very important because if it's oily, the gasket maker will form around imperfections, but it will not attach itself if it's oily, and you will have a leak. If your rag kind of falls apart, gets caught, and leaves lint or debris in here, it's not the end of the world. Just try to pick off as much as you can, get it as clean as possible. And stuff like this right here, where the RTV just has a very, very thin layer that's stuck on there, that's okay. I mean, I scraped it with a razor blade. It could even be stained, so don't worry about that kind of stuff. Just make sure you get it as clean and as dry as possible. And I'm going to go around again with brake parts cleaner and a rag right before the oil pan goes on. But for now, this is good enough. Let's move on to preparing the new oil pan. I'm going to degrease this surface too on the new oil pan, and I know it should be clean already, but you could never go too much with the degreasing. I really want to ensure that there are no potential leaks. I'm going to use some oil resistant gasket maker and just apply a somewhat thin bead to the entire surface area of this oil pan. And it's important to go on the inside of these bolt holes, not on the outside, otherwise oil will leak through the bolt hole. So just go all the way around. Try to get a consistent bead. You can fix it afterward if needed. And if you do have to stop, make sure that there's no gap between the finish of one bead and the start of the next. I'm just trying to make sure that the bead is centered. That way when this squishes down onto the engine block, it spreads evenly. You don't want too much going inside or too much going outside. All right, one last time, you can see that there are 3 pretty large oil drips here. So I'm going to go around the front of the engine first with a clean rag that is soaked with brake parts cleaner, and just wipe off all the oil. All right, now we're clear to put the oil pan back on. Now there's a stud here, and there was supposed to be a stud here, but for me it actually came out with a nut, so I only have this one stud to guide me, which is okay. It's better than nothing. There we go, it's on there. Make sure you put it on. Try to put it on as lined up as you can from the start. That will avoid smearing the RTV around too much, and now you can start on at least a couple of the bolts to hold it on, and then we'll worry about tightening it all the way. For now, I just want to line it up and make sure that it's sitting where it's supposed to. I'm going to put on the nut that goes over this stud here. That one's a little hard to thread on, so I'm going to go with this bolt here just to hold it on. I want one on each side. Very, very gently bottom these out. I don't want to make it tight yet. I just want to bottom out the bolt. And now I'm going to go around and just install all the bolts. I waited about 10-15 minutes for this to start drying, and now I'm going to torque all of these bolts and the nuts to 80 inch-pounds, and that translates to about 6.7 foot-pounds. I'm just going to go in a circle, but I'm going to go around twice. That way I ensure proper torque. This one here that is at an angle, I'm just going to torque at the end because I have to use a swivel. That's going to kind of kill the torque, so I'm just going to do it by hand. All right, I'm gonna go around one more time and just verify that they are all torqued properly. And one last very important step before we go and add oil is to check the drain plug and make sure that it is fully tightened, because a lot of times they're not, and this one was not. So make sure this is nice and snug. All right, let's add some oil. And because we are adding new oil, pretty much doing an oil change, good practice to change the oil filter anytime you change the oil. And well, we basically did an oil change right now with the new oil into the new oil pan. So remove the old filter. I have cleaned the surface up there just a little bit with a rag, and I pre-filled this filter as full as I can get it. I also lubricated the O-ring on it. Start the filter on here, make sure it does not cross thread, very important. And then once it bottoms out, give it about 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn, make it nice and snug, and then clean up your area. Now let's add some oil. With the hood up, locate the oil cap and go ahead and remove it. Make sure there's no debris around here. And then you can either use a funnel or just try to be careful pouring in. Basically, you want to add 4 quarts of 5W30. With the 4 quarts of oil in, reinstall your oil fill cap. And then it's important to check the level once you're done to ensure that there's enough in there. So pull the dipstick and wipe it. Stick it back in all the way, pull it back out, and you want the oil level to be in between the low and full mark, preferably at the full mark, which it is exactly there right now, so that's perfect. Reinsert your dipstick. Now you can turn on the engine and look for leaks. After you've run the engine for a little bit, double check your oil level. It's always good practice. Make sure that it's still topped off where it's supposed to be, and then take it for a road test.